Talk about what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi right now and how 215 bodies were just found buried in a field behind a jail. I honestly don't know how this isn't national news by now. 215 bodies were just found buried in unmarked graves behind the Hinds County Jail, or more specifically, the Hinds County Penal Farm in Jackson, Mississippi. Some of the grave sites were completely unmarked, while others were only identified by a number on a metal rod. The family members of these victims were never notified that their loved ones were buried, and the majority of them still just thought that they were missing. And the state in which this mass graveyard was found is absolutely horrendous. The bodies were placed in body bags and never embalmed before being buried in a shallow grave, and the stench was reportedly so bad that it attracted birds and other animals to try and scavenge for the remains. This discovery has made many question why authorities never investigated these deaths, and why they also chose to never contact the victims' family members before burial. What's even more disgusting is the fact that now that this has gone public, authorities want the victims' family members to pay a fee to collect their loved ones' bodies. This discovery all started because of a mom who was searching for her missing son, Dexter Wade. This is Betterston Wade, and she last saw her son Dexter on March 5th, 2023 around 7:30 p.m. when he left her home. After not being able to contact him, Betterston officially reported Dexter missing to police on March 14th, although at first she was hesitant to do so because she didn't trust the Jackson Police Department. Just 4 years prior, Betterston's 62-year-old brother died after a Jackson police officer slammed him into the ground. That officer was convicted of manslaughter, but he's currently trying to appeal. Because of this, she was scared to report Dexter missing to that same police department, but she ultimately thought that's what was best to try and find him. The case unfortunately was not taken seriously from the very start, as the initial investigator assigned to the case misspelled Dexter's name as Dester. But Betterston gave the police department photos of him and remained in constant contact for updates. She reached out to the police department multiple times over the span of months, but every single time they told her that they had no updates for her, which was not true at all. In fact, they knew where Dexter was from the very beginning. Just 30 minutes after leaving his mom's home the night he went missing, Dexter was hit and killed by an off-duty Jackson police officer in a police SUV. At the time of the incident, the officer was not cited for any traffic violations, he wasn't given a field sobriety test, and Dexter's death was ruled accidental. Now, Jackson police say they were unable to identify him at his time of death, but according to the autopsy, the medical examiner, and from Dexter's body eventually being exhumed, it was found that his driver's license had been in his front pocket the entire time. At first, Jackson PD said they couldn't identify him, but then they changed their story to say that they called Dexter's mom once to inform her of his death, but when she didn't answer, they never tried calling again, even despite the medical examiner giving them that information from the start. Even though Dexter was hit by a Jackson police officer and was reported missing with that same department, whenever Betterston called for updates, they always told her that they were unable to find him. In reality, they'd sent him off to that mass gravesite to be buried in an unmarked grave. That same gravesite where 215 bodies were now just discovered. It wasn't until nearly 8 months later that Jackson PD told Betterston where she could find her son. They took her down that long dirt road deep into the woods, past an empty horse stable and scrapyard behind the Hinds County Penal Farm. As they walked further into the field, they passed rows of metal rods, each marked with a number, in which we now know were actually graves. They eventually stopped at grave number 672, where Dexter had been laying for months unclaimed due to the negligence of Jackson PD. Betterston then had to pay them $250 to claim his body and have him properly buried. Because of this discovery, 2 other men who were buried and forgotten in this graveyard have been identified. One is Jonathan David Hankins, who was reported missing in June of 2022. His family only learned of his death from news outlets on December 4th, not through law enforcement. Jonathan was burned and buried on this field. Another victim is Mario Moore. He was also burned and buried in an unmarked grave in this same field after he was found beaten to death and wrapped in tarp back in February. His family didn't learn about his burial until 8 months after he was killed. Families of the victims are now calling for a federal investigation to uncover the truth about what is really happening in Jackson, Mississippi.